Hey, Pastor Ted here, and this is Walk and Talk. Our topic today, freedom. Freedom is one of those things that really can get people's feathers ruffled. Something that I cherish about the United States is freedom, the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment. And I think that that's where a lot of the challenges to some of the restrictions that have been imposed by government on people's gathering, especially gathering for worship, have come from. And a lot of the unhappiness that people have. The other part of it is probably primarily economic, but the idea that we can't gather for worship really sticks in our craw. And I like freedom. I think freedom's important. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that, to the best of my knowledge, the United States is the most free country in the world. And I know that I've got friends who would lose it. If I said the United States is the best country or the most free, and they'd say, well, what about this country and that country? Usually pointing to Europe. But there's an important difference for me in freedom, and that's our Constitution does not grant us rights that we otherwise would not have, but that it secures for us rights which we have innately by virtue of the fact that we're human beings. And that means that they're given to us by God. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that I believe that the United States is the best country in the world. Why? Not because we have the best outcomes in every way, not because we have the least amount of racial inequality or economic inequality, because those things really don't define best for me. Yes, I think we have a lot of those things, and I think that we ought to be close to the top of those lists in many ways. And when we fall short of that, we should work harder. But folks, the thing that makes this country great is that we have the right idea when it comes to rights. Our rights are not given to us by government, they're given to us by virtue of the fact that we're human beings. Our rights come from the fact that we are made in the image of God. In fact, apart from that concept found in Genesis of humans being made in the image of God, the idea of natural rights doesn't make any sense. And so in the absence of natural rights, you have to come up with rights that come from some other source. What source is that? Well, usually the answer people give is either society or government, but both amount to something that is controlled by the opinion of someone else. My right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness are not up in the air, up for grabs, something that are open to discussion. They can only be taken when my rights have infringed upon the rights of another. It's especially difficult for us then to contemplate that the government would take away a right which some of us would believe shouldn't be taken away because there's not really a problem. So we run into a clash of two different kinds of ideals. One is the idea that our rights come to us from God and that people can't take them away without due process. And the other is that freedom is something that comes with responsibilities. This is a philosophical question which has been addressed long before there was a such thing as the Renaissance or the idea of John Locke and Hobbes and all the writers whose philosophical writings undergird the ideas of the founding fathers like Jefferson and Madison. That conversation goes back very far into the past. What is the citizen's source of rights? And what responsibility does a citizen have? Those are good questions, and they're not easy ones to answer. And it's here where we find the challenge of being a citizen and being a Christian. Not because you can't be a good Christian and be a good citizen. Many times those things are fundamentally compatible goals. The question we always have to ask ourselves is, what does freedom mean? You see, freedom's a great thing. Everybody likes freedom. Nobody says, no, please enslave me. I'd like to be a servant to others. I'd like to have my rights be contingent upon the whim of the majority or some ruling minority. Nobody wants that. I don't want it, and you don't. The underlying problem with all of this is that we couch these decisions in terms of freedom without thinking about what freedom is for. Why is freedom good? And only one half of that equation is the question of what's your freedom from. Freedom from the scrutiny and control of others. It's not a bad thing. I don't want people controlling my life. You don't have a right to do that. I want to be free from government interference as much as possible. I, for one, don't want to be anybody's servant or slave in society that I don't choose to follow, choose to serve, choose to give that power to. Freedom from unnecessary control, government coercion, unreasonable search and seizure, the prohibition of my religion or the restriction of my freedom to gather, to worship, or to speak. I don't want any of that. For Christians, there's another side of the question of freedom. It's not just a question of what are we free from. It's a question of what we're free for. We're not merely freed from our neighbor, but we're freed for our neighbor, which means we're freed not just from the control of our neighbor, but also from our selfish turning in on ourselves. We're freed from our own idolatry of self. It's not enough for Christians to say, I'm freed from, therefore I may do as I please. To paraphrase St. Paul, everything is lawful for me, but not everything is helpful. We're not just freed from our neighbor, but we are also freed for our neighbor. It's an essential part of what it is to follow Jesus. If your Christian walk is about you and your freedoms and your desires and your wants, you're not following Jesus, you're following yourself. And it might make you feel good, but it's not loving your neighbor. Jesus taught that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord God with all your heart, and with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. But then, having been asked what the greatest commandment is, he says another is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. You can't have one without the other. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? What does it mean that you're not just freed from the control of your neighbor, but you are freed for the love of your neighbor? These aren't easy questions. They don't admit of easy answers. But there are some categories we can exclude. We can exclude on one side the radical individualism that says, I'm an independent individual, I owe nothing to society, and society owes me nothing. I can do my own thing, and I can make my own decisions. Not only is that bad civics, it's also bad religion. Because we never, ever exist in a vacuum. On the other hand, we can reject radical collectivism. Your individual rights don't matter. What matters is what society needs, and you don't really factor into it. That's the kind of reasoning that allows people to have their property confiscated and their lives taken simply because the government wishes to do so. So I'm afraid I leave you in the mucky middle between individualism on one side and collectivism on the other, between freed from the restrictions of others and the restrictions upon your own soul because of the blood of Jesus Christ, while at the same time being freed in love for service to others. For Christians, as we have these conversations about when to reopen, how to reopen, who should be there and what they should be doing, how we should care for the weakest in society, to ignore either of those big questions is to put society itself in peril. Let me know down in the comments where you see those questions, freed from what and freed for what, playing out around you. That's all I got for you today. Have a good one. The whole point of what he's talking about. Hey, Jerry. I'm not just talking to myself. I'm recording a video for church. I wasn't shooting video of you, man. Here's Jerry. Jerry's a weirdo. Stay away from Jerry. Yes, sir. Yeah, you too.